So I guess, hi everybody, welcome to our first ever second version of our Code Talk Teach web show thing. I'm Kyle Cordes at Oasis Digital. Say hello, guys.
Hello, I'm Paul, also with Oasis Digital.
And I'm Lance Finney, also with Oasis Digital.
A lot of Oasis Digital going on. Okay, so what are we going to talk about this week?
Well, the world around us is Angular, and what's going on right now, at least what I'm watching, is that the CFP is open for ngConf. Just opened a couple days ago.
I admit to being a little bit distracted from Angular specific or even software dev specific news for the last week.
Well, there's that.
But yeah.
I had a tweet last week, something along the lines of, is anyone else having trouble concentrating on doing a code review for one of your teammates' PRs?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind then, because Wednesday was rough.
So maybe after we talk about this thing you just mentioned, CFP thing, talk about how to balance attention between the project you're trying to do and just like the chaos of the world. That'd be a great idea. So ngConf CFP, I got a automated bulk email like everybody else that the CFP is open. Do we have any sense of like how many slots they're filling? How many CFP slots there are?
No, I haven't heard for sure. One of the things that can help us, though, is that this is now the third ngConf that's virtual, so we at least have an idea of how they're doing it now, compared to last time when we all submitted for one type of conference and then the world changed and it ended up being a completely different thing. But still, even within that, I don't know exactly how many slots are officially available, are kind of soft available. I really don't know.
So how is it that we're less than a year into all the craziness of COVID and we're on our third virtual ngConf? You know how that happens?
They stuck one in the middle.
Okay.
Well, it turns out that I've talked to several people, including potentially one or more organizers of this conference. I don't think I'm betraying any confidences to say that everyone who I've talked to around this conference and otherwise has noticed that just the sheer logistical effort of putting on a conference in this online-only world is shockingly less. It's still not easy, but there is just so much, it's just so less of an overwhelming thing to put on. So basically, it's easier to add a second conference with a different focus. And, we're talking about people who are really good at doing stuff. And then here's a cool idea that's easy to do more. Yeah, they're going to do more. So they did another one. I really liked it. I liked having two, especially since the other biggest Angular conference of the year, Connect, I think that canceled totally, right?
Never officially announced that I saw.
I guess it didn't cancel. It just never announced happening in the first place.
Yeah, I kept my eye on the website waiting to see either a CFP being opened or an official announcement of cancellation, and I never saw it. So I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you never do, you never have to cancel, right? So, so there was no Connect in the fall. So I really enjoyed there being a second ngConf event for the year. I thought that was good. But so for this next one, we don't know exactly how many slots, but I assume the format will be similar. I guess. I got to think back. I mean, it feels like 3 years ago. If I think back to whatever was that in May that ngConf happened?
May or April.
It's like the third month of March. The 3rd March 2020 is when it happened. But that was single track, I think. That was the one where the chat kind of broke.
Pizza.
Yeah, that pizza thing people did. But yeah, the chat broke, and then the site was iffy, right? But then the streams, was the stream iffy, or did the stream work pretty well? I'm trying to remember that conference.
There, the stream worked fairly well, I think.
Yeah, I think the stream held up.
Yeah, the stream held up. The chat did not, but the stream was pretty good.
But yeah, I mean, so in the fall, the enterprise conference, the tool worked much better. Although it had its own issues, but the tool worked much better. I would assume whatever they're going to use in this coming spring will be a further improvement. Either the same tool will get better. So I mean, I think we can safely assume that this will be the upcoming NGConf will be the best online NGConf yet. So I think that's that's safe to assume because everybody's figuring out how to do this stuff. It's now possible to like buy a webcam, whereas in the spring, if you didn't have a webcam, you weren't getting a webcam. But now, if you need a webcam, you can actually order and receive it.
Well, we've also seen the emergence of the Angular community Discord that has really implemented those online events lately.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that there's been like an effort to get a chat channel system that can actually support the needs of a dev community, and it seems like Discord is working really well towards that end.
Is there like is the community is that affiliated with NGConf? It's not. I don't know.
So not officially.
I admit paying no attention. I'm sorry.
Not officially, but they kind of offered up their services to be the supporting channel, and I believe they switched over to it in the later days of the conference.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about Discord is that it works.
Yeah.
Like Discord is not going to be surprised and then taken down by a couple thousand software developers. That's nothing by Discord standards.
Right.
Huh. So I actually wrote down that as a potential thing to talk about and take a tour of together in a future show. So
yeah. So back to NGConf specifically, they're going to try again with their NGConf the musical theme, which I think is interesting because that's what they did last year, and they still kind of had that for the oh my gosh, within 3 weeks, let's redo everything. So that initial virtual one still had some of the musical theme, but a lot of the ideas, like I know Chloe Condon was supposed to be doing something to help co-MC it, and that didn't quite happen and things. So my guess is now that they have more time, it will be more fully implemented, and we might see more show and more interesting things about being a musical, besides just a few talk titles that still had that legacy, but the overall theme wasn't that way.
Now, is that explicitly listed anywhere? Because I didn't actually see those words anywhere. I can see some of the images allude to that, but otherwise I don't see that being listed as a theme for the.
Yeah, I'm looking at the website right now, and behind the NGConf logo, there are images of Broadway, and there's a little bit of the Hamilton cast and stuff. And yeah, they're definitely using the iconography of it. I thought in the emails that they referred to it as NGConf the musical. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure.
So I'm going to attempt some science here. I think if I click the right button, I can get the stream to include a picture of the website so we can look at it. I think it worked. That worked, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out if the musical theme is official. Yeah, I mean, look at the background.
So it's Broadway.
And look at the font choice. Yeah, everything about this is clearly intended to have the musical theme. Oh, look at that. They kept the picture of the physical space, even though this one is not quite there. Great. Yeah, okay, so that answered the question. And we got to try the whiz-bang feature to have a shared screen. So
I went ahead and I pulled up their call for presenters also.
Yeah?
It looks like, let's see. They are doing the musical. NGConf the musical is going to be the title again. Much of it centered around that theme, encouraging creativity within the music and Broadway genres. So the talks are going to be pre-recorded again. So that's kind of the format they're going with again, and they're going to help out with that. So looks like they're really digging into reinventing the musical theme they had, but now with the experience they've gained from doing a couple of these online. So it really seems to be supporting that idea.
I've attended maybe a half dozen significant events that that moved online, and I would say it became obvious within the first few that having them pre-recorded is just a tremendously good idea. Like the quality of the presentations that were just much higher for people that went, for organizations that did them pre-recorded, because basically if it was bad, you just record it again until it's not bad. So I'm really happy that they're going to stick with that.
Yeah. Well, I submitted a talk this morning. I did not lean into the musical. Last year, we spent a lot of energy trying to come up with puns and ideas and talks that went off the theme of the musical and didn't actually work for us.
I don't know why. If I was an organizer, I would have made a great pun in the title, just a hard requirement for every.
Yes. So, but I also, one of the nice things with NGConf is when you submit a talk, it's still available to look at later because they're using a Google form for it. So if I come up with a pun for the particular talk that I had, I can go back and tweak it. But at least I got something out there.
That's good.
Yeah, last year we had. Go ahead.
I wonder, with all of the talk submissions that they were able to accept last time, if that wouldn't make room for resubmission of some of our talk titles from previous years. Since we already have a whole for the musical theme, maybe they can get around to them this year.
Yeah, it's possible.
So to kind of to borrow from that topic a bit, Paul, I think that it's always good to have things super timely at a conference, and it's so much fun to be at a conference when something major new is announced and comes out. But probably 80% of what I see at conferences is not exactly completely timeless, but at least halfway timeless. Like stuff that really would be fine, just as up to date the year later with some version bumps. And particularly Angular is so version stable that it's hard to imagine almost anything from last year's that's totally obsolete, right? Very little content, even either that was part of the event or that was submitted and wasn't part of the event, would be very obsolete. I think that's that obviously there's negatives of that also, right? It maybe makes it a little bit less appealing to come see the live thing happen, but that's a pretty good positive too.
Yeah, although I do have a counterexample to that. A year and a half ago, I gave a talk on Angular unit testing, and I went back and tried to look at it again this week, and it turned out that Ivy, or with the change that included Ivy, so Angular 9, they converted some errors into warnings. And so some of the things that I was teaching about, this is how you have to deal with this error when it comes up and blocks you. Well, it doesn't block you anymore. So if anyone went back to that year and a half old talk and tried to follow the steps that I had using Angular 10, 11, they would think I had no idea what I was doing because they'd hit the spot where I said, all right, here's a nearly insurmountable roadblock, and it doesn't even exist anymore.
By the way, my cup here is kind of a shout out to anybody who has been following all things Oasis Digital for a very long time, because 2 or 3 offices ago, we were located next to this place called Llewellyn's, and I still have plastic cups that they give out at Llewellyn's, some even from that era. So,
good times.
Yeah. Look, an office located immediately adjacent to food is a good idea. It's just, it's as nice as it is to have these online events hanging out together. It's so much nicer to do so at a pub next to the office. So, later this year, maybe, hopefully. So what else do we have? Any more about NGConf?
Well, I'm looking forward to going again. Although I do have to say, as nice as many of the things about virtual are, having been to several conferences over a few years to get to know people, there just is something missing with a virtual conference versus being able to see people in the hallway and talk to them in person, and sit back with your favorite beverage from a place like Llewellyn's and just catch up. So I do very much look forward to the days when real conferences, in-person conferences happen. And they may never be the same as they were before, but something like it will come back.
I think we need to make them better. We need to figure out what we've learned from online and take that back to in-person. I'd like to see a conference where there's a more like intentional focus on hallway track time in some way. I don't know exactly what it would look like, but I think that just learning information is kind of better to do online. It's kind of better to watch. Like live only online conferences are in a sense worse than ones where you can pause it, let it get behind a little bit, then watch it at 1.5 or more speed. Because watching someone present at only real time is just a low bandwidth, inefficient way to communicate info, unless it's about something that's of just enormous gravity and very novel. Well, something like that, 1x speed, of course, right? Or even you say, hey, slow this down. I want to be able to pay closer attention. But so much conference content, you're following along with a presentation about a topic you're reasonably familiar with, and you're kind of having your ears are open. Say, oh, I'm listening for something new, but I'm not doing this 40 minutes because it's 40 minutes of novelty to me. I'm listening to 40 minutes because there might be 5 minutes in there that it's like really, really novelty. I wish there was a way at a conference to, instead of having it where much of the group is like kind of doing this low bandwidth information receiving and then occasionally talking, somehow make the entire event about interacting with each other.
I mean, InchiConf in the past with their what was it, was it Fair Day? Is that what they called it? Or am I making that up? Yeah, that was a nice change from what I've seen in past conferences, where it's a day dedicated, pretty much like you said, to the interaction and the multiple random meetings of many different topics that you can kind of pick and choose.
There's still a lot of scheduled events, though. A lot of things going on that would take your attention away. Maybe like hallway track day or something. I've once been to a conference kind of outside this tech space that intentionally had like it was scheduled with 45 minutes. Each break was 45 minutes for the explicit purpose of the reason you're here is to interact with other people. And so rather than packing them tight and you try to fit some interaction between, we're intentionally leaving. Like, I think I had like 2-hour lunches because like, oh, the whole point of this is to be able to interact with as many people as possible. It's kind of amazing. So what else should we talk about?
Well, we got our first
our big topic
for architects public offering.
Yeah,
at Oasis soon.
Yeah, that's as we speak. That's like a couple weeks out, a week out, something like that.
Yep, 2 weeks out.
On the off chance somebody watches this, how could we direct somebody who's interested in this topic?
I mean, they can
maybe I'll bring it up and do a quick screen share or something, if I can remember from a moment ago how I did that. And so in this thing you can do a screen share, but then you can pick to do just a single tab, which is often what we want to do, and then you can make that tab available inside the event. So I add it. There we go. So this is what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
And so I guess if I want to illustrate as we speak, the next one, the first one ever is on the 26th, the 29th. Wow, I didn't know this was that long, Paul.
Yep.
And then obviously if it goes well, there should be many more, but here, we'll leave that up a minute. So for someone watching this who wonders what on earth is an Angular for Architects, what is an Angular for Architects?
Yeah, so Angular for Architects is kind of the natural progression of the services and the teaching that we've done at Oasis Digital in the past. And so this is the result of having taught many organizations a fairly standard Angular bootcamp. It was live instructor-led, and that's what really made it unique, was that we were able to deliver a whole lot of instructors out into the world with experience using the stuff. But we found that the follow-up need after that basic class come along beside these organizations, and for their first effort to seriously try and set some company or project standards, they had just taken the Angular Bootcamp course and they knew how to use the Angular API, but they still didn't have a good sense of like what an Angular project is going to look like over time. What are the pitfalls they're going to run into at the project level, at the staffing level? What kind of trade-offs are they going to run into when choosing between tools? There's just a lot of questions that come up before your fingers even touch the keyboard when it comes to the life cycle of a project and how that meets with Angular. And so we come alongside and partner with these organizations that we were training to help guide them, walk them through, show them what to expect, and from there be able to guide their architects and their senior developers in kind of deciding what made sense for their company to establish, not only for that project, but for their organization as well as a best practice. So
I wish I could have attended this when we were starting with Angular.
Right, yeah. So distilling that down into here's our process, here's what we go through, and showing a timeline of an Angular project, and kind of setting up some exemplary demo projects to walk a class through is going to provide some opportunities to discuss those decision points, those opportunities for trade-off, and kind of share with them our experience of having worked with many clients as they go through this discovery process, and of course have time to discuss with them the challenges that they're facing to help guide them. Of course, it's in a 3-day session, so it's not like we're sitting down and digging into the meat of their project, but it is a great chance to come in and get a high-level understanding of what you're going to run into, and how some planning up front might help with that.
Is it 3 days? 26, 27? Looks like 4 days on here.
It is. So it is 3 days of content, but for the online version of it, we make that 4 shorter days.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're doing an in-person class, in a hopeful post-COVID future, the idea would be that we would show up for 3 to 4 full days, depending on what you want.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like 3 days of stuff, but 4 days, so that way it's not starting too early or ending too late. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it's for all time zones, it's kind of hitting a nice sweet spot also.
Yeah, I wish at the beginning of when I was working in like web technology, I wish I could have learned from something like that to start.
Yeah. Well, and it's been surprising trying to figure out, how to even answer the very first question, which is, what is Angular architecture?
So what is Angular architecture? As an expert who I think I might have heard is like doing a class on this shortly, what is Angular architecture?
No, it's just RxJS, right? Just sprinkle that everywhere and you're done, I think.
I mean, there's the word architect somewhere in those schematic things. Is that what Angular architecture is?
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think that one of the first things that we figured out was that it actually changes depending on where your project is, what stage of life your project's in, because it starts off with just trying to, like, the very first thing an Angular architect might need to do, for example, is try to explain, justify, defend, provide reason for the choice of Angular as a framework for use within an organization. And so, like, right out of the gate, the architect has a very different role then 2 days later, after let's say a decision's made just for using Angular, now what do we do? Like that hat they wear has to kind of shift pretty drastically from providing an explanation of justification for like budgeting, trade-off, staffing, what kind of open source projects are going to use, to okay, now how do I lay out some files in a folder structure that makes sense for our project? So
yeah, I mean,
very contextual answer.
I was in the discussion when we were trying to figure out what that headline should read, and I remember we were talking about like, is it worth the risk of putting off a kind of, I guess, like a pure technologist who might see the thing about budgets and be like, get away, wave the whole thing off, versus, the people who find themselves at the junction of technology and making a project work, where like understanding the effect of a technology's choice on a budget is highly salient to being successful in your job that year.
Right. Yeah.
So like we usually see kind of the edge of this as consultants, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we talk so much in our industry about front end versus back end versus designer, in terms of like roles and positions that an organization might seek to fill, and how those things are actually very different, and they have a large overlapping section, but holistically those are very different disciplines. And I think what a lot of people in our industry have come to expect of an architect is that, oh, they're just the most senior developer. And like obviously there's some truth to that idea, that an architect has probably been a senior developer at some point, but the architect really does need to like blend into that product owner budgeting constraint, staffing management constraint. Like that's, in my opinion, what differentiates the architecture, is that you're not just talking about and figuring out, hey, what is the most technologically idealized way of achieving a thing. It is, how do we make these and mix and match the constraints of the organization to make something and be able to execute on something successfully that delivers value, which is kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum of what we talk about with designers, where designers, it's, how do we blend and mix and match the technical and product owner constraints with the needs of our end users to provide something that delivers value. And it's on the architecture, and it's like almost the reverse of that, where they have to take the organizational constraints and mix them with technology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to raise the ire of people in the industry from which we have borrowed the words engineer and architect, where they have different and very concrete meanings. In the world of the people who build bridges, those words have a very different meaning than how we have borrowed them here. But even keeping in mind we're staying away from those meetings, I feel like there's a little bit of a like kind of title inflation, like industry-wide title inflation, to where the word architect has come to sort of mean developer who can really make it happen.
I have 2 undergrad engineering degrees, and so having everyone calling themselves an engineer who writes some software has sometimes rankled me a bit.
We have one in our midst here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have never worked as a professional engineer. I never even thought about taking the professional engineering exam, so I don't have all the legs to stand on with this, but yeah, sometimes I notice it. But with the term architect, sometimes I've had trouble trying to figure out, at what point would I become an architect, or did I become an architect? Because sometimes it seems that an architect is expected to be the person who knows every single possible answer in technology, and then can bring to the fore, all right, if we're going to install a server, then here are the X thousand different options, and I know that this one is specifically the best because of XYZ. And no one can actually do that, but that's kind of how architects sometimes comes across. And that's not what we're talking about with this class. And it does, I think, really help that we're talking specifically within the Angular space, and how do you architect an Angular related application. We're not saying how to architect every application for every situation, but once you're within that world, all right, these are the best practices. These are the things that are going to blow up your budget or help you do your, either your financial budget or even your data budget or whatever budget, help you figure out within those constraints what's going well.
So,
Yeah.
so without stealing too much thunder from this event we're just kind of borrowing from, like what's the answer to that?
Well, I know I was going to say that, that constraint, that finding that boundary, one of the things when we were trying to figure out what exactly do we want to go into this course, we had to figure out where those lines were. And one of them that immediately came to mind was, we were going down the rabbit hole of, okay, so we have our Angular project, our Angular workspace. We're going to have some sort of tooling and CLI around it, and that's going to have to tie into a CI/CD pipeline, and we're going to have source control as part of that. And even though those things are all connected, like, we had to find at what point do we stop scoping outward. And things like Git, obviously you're going to be using source control. Source control is still off the table for this particular topic. CI/CD, we're actually included that because there are these interesting intersections between Angular and your choice of build tooling that affect how you set up CI/CD. And so even though it's like, yeah, we're scoped it to Angular, it's still amazing how much that seeps out into the broader development world.
So for like CI/CD, you mentioned, like, what is Angular specific in CI/CD?
Well, so very specifically, here's a very interesting one-off little tidbit. I was using GitHub Actions to do my CI/CD for my Angular project. My Angular project consisted of an NX workspace. Inside that NX workspace, kind of the default linting and formatting is to use ESLint and Prettier. Well, the way they set up their default scripts inside their workspace is to say, we're going to only format things that have changed based off of what's at the head of master. Well, the intersection here of like why it might be important to talk about CI/CD is that for that one little bitty snippet of information, when you're in GitHub Actions, the way they check out your repository to run the CI/CD processes against, it actually doesn't actually track the names and the contents of the branches, just the head commit. And so their affected tooling that they have operates against an understanding of the history of the branches. And so like there's this weird cascading effect that you're only going to have this problem if you are using this tooling that happens to be stood up on top of an Angular project.
I have experienced that with none of the tooling in common you're talking about except for Git. Like in kind of an earlier era on a Jenkins build server, where we were working with somebody where they had an optimized, they had optimized their CI by optimizing what was checked out in a way that the checkout only got the current branch, only got the targeted branch, and didn't even get the whole history. And so there was no way with that checkout to ask the question of Git, what is the diff from here to the main line?
Right.
So we had to like de-optimize that fetch a little bit.
Yep.
To get to cast a little wider net, so that the main line could be visible in the Git commands to answer those questions. That's quite the tangle. So what's the boundary between an architecture question and a find someone really good at duct taping tools question?
Yeah, I think to me that the boundary, and this is just my personal opinion, the boundary is that for the architect needs to know about the CI/CD platforms that exist out there, and simply understand that, yeah, there are going to be interoperability issues that come up depending upon what CI/CD platform you pick and which set of build toolchain you use to actually run your tooling, your build process, etc. Just have an awareness that there is a conflict there, and it would be nice if said architect could walk through those, but more realistically be able to have them point to someone that knows about and could actually work on the finicky bits that might come up would be sufficient.
So like the architecture is understanding the overall flow and intention of the system so that when something comes up, to like understand kind of fundamentally what's going on. Not necessarily like we're not going to teach people like the Git incantation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But just have them know that, yeah, just because you have, let's say, I don't know, an Azure, build setup, doesn't mean you can just pick that up and move it over to GitHub, and use GitHub Actions as now your delivery platform.
Yeah, because there might be some difference, even though they're both using Git and they're both running in a container. There'll be some. They're not identical. There's some difference in how they're using Git and some difference in how they're running in a container.
But so for the Angular architect, knowing what it is about Angular that might make that move tricky, or might cause some consternation or difficulties as it relates to Angular, is the Angular architect area. So in this case, the answer would be, well, the way NX or CLI builds, pardon me, the way NX or CLI builds, there might be something to that could cause a difference in your environment.
Interesting.
So yeah, lots to cover, and that's just one tiny little intro topic there that we can get into. Really spend a lot of time unpacking. So Lance, you mentioned RX, and interestingly enough, RX is not a big topic in this architecture class. It comes up, and certainly areas that bump into it, and we will show some RX code. Pardon me. But for the most part, it's more like how data will flow through the system rather than what operators do I need to use.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, if we wanted to dig into RX in depth, I mean, that would use up. I mean, you can RX is an enormous topic. You could talk about RX for days and not leave time for anything else.
Yeah. But I think where we do bump up against it is in kind of talking about how much is too much RX. We do have topics in there where we talk about state management and understanding, okay, do I use RX? Do I use NGRX? Do I use something else? What are all those trade-offs? And so talking about how much RX is too much RX is definitely something that's on the table.
So I've heard, I think what the context was and who all it was. I know it was at least Stephen Fluen on the Angular team, possibly several others, saying that they receive roughly equal parts requests that Angular focus on RxJS more and that it focus on RxJS less. And I kind of wonder if that's going to be mirrored in this Angular for Architects that we're talking about. If we're going to have that same feedback where out of the group that attends, half will ask to have there be more RX and half less.
Well, I'm hoping that both groups would be happy in this class, because it's not about the syntax of it. So if you're not happy with RxJS, then you don't have to worry about being bombarded with a whole bunch of RxJS syntax. But if you are, having a more high level, data flow, observability, reactive conversation, it's still going to be very helpful and present in the class.
So Angular for Architects is both about how Angular fits into a broader system, but also about what the architecture is inside a project.
Yeah, absolutely.
I almost feel like we could take apart what becomes this, paid event, and that could be fodder for the next 20 of these conversations.
Yeah, it's the challenge of this class is being able to dive deep enough into each topic. Because the architecture area is such a large surface area, and so we just gotta kind of gauge the audience and see what's going to be most helpful to those in attendance.
So on that question of RX, what is your kind of just someone grabs you on the street, says, how much RX is a good amount of RX in terms of the architecture of my Angular app?
Well, I'd kind of like to hear Lance's thought, because he and I typically take kind of different approaches towards our state management. So I'd kind of like to hear what Lance's thought is on that question first.
Ooh, put on the spot.
Yeah. I tend to do as much RX as I can, although I do find that there are times that I will drop back if I know a particular observable is only doing a one shot and I want to make use of it, that sometimes I will do to promise, which I know is going to be deprecated soon. But in general, I try to think about things as reactively as I can. I have that going on my project right now. Spent a couple hours this morning with one of the newer developers on the team who does not have a lot of experience with RX and was running into a lot of problems of figuring out, all right, this particular component is disabled if this component changes, or if this component in combination changes, and trying to write that all imperatively, he was running himself in just ragged. And so I said, all right, do it reactively by saying, all right, this is invalid if, well, then you take the value changes off these other things and you can add these together and you can just have it be executed when it needs to be executed and have that reactive flow. And so that is kind of what I push towards. So my initial thought is I haven't run across too much RX yet as being the problem, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 minutes of talking with the two of you that I'll say, oh yeah, that's a good point. But that's my general rule of thumb, is to RX all the things.
But you actually went a different direction from that than I thought.
I'm going to throw a grenade out here too. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of, the overall state management architecture. Like, okay. I expect you to say, like, well, we use it for, within the effects of our NGRX project. Is kind of where I expected that answer to go.
Yeah, well, and definitely do that too. Well, in the project I'm working on right now, our first crack at state management when it was a small app was doing everything in reactive forms, and that worked well until we're now getting to a point that we're running into some trouble with just the flexibility and saving data to the back end, and the data is in the shape that is dictated by the reactive form. The nested form is dictating a particular shape, and so we're kind of coupled to this particular shape because that's the reactive form. So we're moving it actively right now. Like on my other screen, I have code that I'm working on NGRX right now to try to get it to NGRX to break that out. But both of those approaches, reactive forms and NGRX, have an R in their name because they are both reactive. So in that particular case, it's not that I'm going more reactive. I'm going from one reactive to a different reactive because of some of the other issues involved.
So I just wanted to throw this out here. I brought up the Cycle.js website here briefly. I tend to go in the direction Lance is describing of being of really leveraging RxJS, because early when I was trying to learn RxJS, I stumbled over into the world of Cycle.js and spent a few very weird months there. And over in that world, basically, you build everything from either RxJS or one of several other libraries that's similar to RxJS. And so if you come in from that point of view, if you have that hammer and you've really polished it up, absolutely everything is a nail. And so now that Lance and I have both cheered RxJS pretty heavily, I'm curious, Paul, what were you suggesting that you might not urge the same thing?
No, I mean, I'm a big fan of RxJS. I think what was interesting was our perception around the world, around the word of RxJS versus reactive. Because whenever you asked the question, I was thinking RxJS, and Lance was thinking reactive. And for Lance, reactive included NGRX. Like that, to him, bundled that in there is what it sounded like anyway. And to me, that was actually a different thing. Yes, NGRX is a reactive framework, but I don't think of RxJS and reactive. I don't put those two terms together in my head in practice. So it was interesting to hear that that was synonymous, because I could actually create an entirely reactive web app with just observables and no NGRX like Cycle does, and think that I'm a completely reactive app framework that I'm sitting on top of, and that would mean something completely different to Lance, who may or may not assume NGRX was in the mix also.
Yeah, I mean, well, as I said, we started with reactive forms, and I think of that as reactive because the name, but also it gives us value changes and gives us observables, and we were able to do, operators and combining things and all that stuff. Both of the approaches that we're considering on the project I'm on right now are built on tools that are built on RxJS. So they're both reactive. I wasn't trying to draw a distinction that says in order to be reactive you have to have NGRX or anything like that. It's right. Both of them are ways to build things that are on top of using observables and all the power that observables give. I do not think that you need to use either one in particular to be reactive. That comes from using RxJS or something similar and the observables itself.
Yeah, and I wasn't intentionally trying to create a distinction either. It was just interesting to see that our minds internalized and interpreted that question differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was wild.
So I think we're going to have to title this the Angular Philosophies podcast, because as
there you go,
breaking down the exact definition of all these terms. What is architect? What is reactive?
But it kind of the topics kind of are, and I think if you go back historically, didn't philosophy and logic find themselves very tightly bound, and the origins of software development kind of came out of that space. That's that's what this is, right? We're building these big complex webs of ideas and call them computer programs. The philosophy is right there.
Logic is one of the major branches of philosophy, and computer science grew out of logic. There are a lot of other parents of computer science, but that's one of them. This does remind me, and I had no idea that this conversation was going to go in this direction, but I saw recently a tweet or something like that from someone who said that one of the best employees they ever had as a software developer was someone who never had any computer science background. It was someone who came out of studying the Torah. So he went to Hasidic school and spent his life studying the Torah. And he wasn't actually good at the mechanics of writing code, but you could give him code and he would sit there and stare at it. And after a few hours, tell you exactly what happened. And the person who wrote this tweet thread said, how can you do that? You don't even know this stuff. And he said, well, my training is to look at text and think really hard about every single line of it and all of its implications and where it goes. And so I'm just applying what I originally learned for religion to code, and it's the exact same skill set.
Life goal. I want to write programs that other people will dedicate their lives to figuring out what I meant.
Yeah.
So you want to create a code religion?
Isn't that called TypeScript? Wait, no.
I mean, if you want to write write-only non-readable code, there are a lot of ways to get that done.
It's called C++, right? No.
I was not going to name any specific particular language.
Language is the same. By the way, so as anyone would watch this would know, we're still trying to figure out kind of what our format is. And I have a proposed candidate based on some conversation I've seen here that we include the tweets of the week. And maybe, we bring a half dozen tweets or threads worth talking about I think out of all of Twitter, surely on a given week, we can come up with a few of them that are worthy of some attention.
Can we close with a twit of the day?
A twit of the day. What's a twit of the day? A person being stupid on Twitter? Is that the?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. So I don't know how long we're going to go here, but we have in mind. I'm trying to think. Well, I think we have 4 viewers at least, but I don't see any comments. So we'll see if any comments come in. But if any comments come in, we would definitely try to do a Q&A around those comments. But certainly, if anybody sees this on YouTube, I would encourage them to write some comments there, because we get like an email alert that there are comments, and so if somebody asks some interesting bit of follow-up question, there's a pretty good chance that we'll talk about it in the future. We're suckers for something, especially if it's mildly controversial. We'll probably talk about it. So aim for mildly controversial in your comments. That's kind of all I have. I just encourage everybody to, follow along here, subscribe or whatever, so that if this is worth watching. Anybody else have anything to add before we wrap up our first ever episode?
No. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. We're not going to do like an impromptu twit of the week. I can't think of one offhand myself. So
yeah, I mean, maybe as our format develops, we do a twit of the week. We might do picks. Who knows? But I don't think we're there yet.
That's been done before. So I guess we'll sign off.
Mm-hmm.
Goodbye, our one viewer.
Thanks for coming.